80 minutes times 18 adds up pretty much exactly to 24 hours. Wales have now been losing rugby matches for 24 straight hours. It would take you a full day to watch all of these games back. And that's without stoppages. That's just when the clock's running. Like the first half on Saturday went for a full hour, so that'd be even longer.
That was a long-ass hour, by the way.
Was.
Especially at 6 a.m. That was long.
So, or 7 a.m. by the time it was done.
Yeah.
So, Wales have lost once again. They've lost to Japan. We will look at this from a neutral point of view, from a Japanese point of view, and from a Welsh point of view. But I do think, as Welsh fans, it's worth starting with that point, that Wales have now lost 18 games in a row. The record for a Tier 1 nation is 18.
Yeah.
France lost 18 games in a row between, I think it was 1902, 1903, and then they continued that. There was then like the Second World War, no, the First World War rather, happened in the middle, and then they picked it up and they then lost the next few games after that. An 18-game losing streak that went on for something like 11 years in the end because of the war. But
we wouldn't even have a war in the middle of it to stretch out after
No.
11 years. We'll just keep doing it.
Yeah. So if Wales lose on Saturday, they will officially have the longest ever losing streak of a Tier 1 nation. The longest ever, I think, was Sri Lanka, I want to say, who lost 27 games in a row. There was a team that lost 27
Sri
in a row
Lanka.
anyway.
We're coming
So,
for you.
yeah. So that's
love
still some way
records.
off. But Wales, yeah.
It's depressing how that's actually genuinely plausible.
It's plausible.
Genuinely possible, because you look at Wales' autumn fixtures, they're already hard. You look at Wales' Six Nations fixtures, we're not as good as any of those teams out there. It's hard to see where the next win's going to come from unless it's this Saturday.
I think it's this Saturday. You've got Japan and the autumn in Cardiff as well, which I think
Yeah.
is the one game I look at from this first 2 years of the World Cup cycle so far, and I go, that is the most winnable game Wales have had.
Yeah.
And Fiji was winnable at home as well. Should have been. And winning one of the two tests in Japan should be winnable. But this was...
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because a lot of people are, rightfully or wrongfully, saying that this is like rock bottom for Wales. I do agree in a sense. Now, I think Japan were favourites for that game.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was an upset at all. Japan were meant to win that game.
We talked about it beforehand. That Japanese team, I think, looked better last year than this Welsh team. And we heard a lot, including on commentary with Gareth Rhys Owen, who, fantastic commentator, fascinating guy, knows his shit. But talked about this not being a vintage Japanese team, right? And I think, anecdotally, we talked about this in our preview, that this Japan team, if you looked at them last year, looked like they were going somewhere. When I looked at the two teams, both of them were losing most of their games. Japan still won 4 games last year, and Wales won 0. And admittedly, they had an easier fixture list, Japan. But when I looked at their fixtures, when I looked at their games themselves, right, there were clear signs of this is what the coach is trying to achieve. This is what these players are working towards. With Wales, I got no sense of that whatsoever. Game to game, they seem to be approaching different things. It seemed like Gatland was second guessing himself and going okay, maybe we need to do this for this campaign, maybe this for this one, trying to approach it differently. And then Sherritt comes in and changes that entirely and tries to do different things. And he felt like Wales weren't building anywhere. Wales were just flailing around.
Yeah.
The analogy I used elsewhere was it felt like Japan were breaking eggs to make an omelette. Wales were just smashing eggs around the kitchen. They were just chucking eggs around and hoping that somewhere scrambled eggs would appear.
Yeah, sure. As I say, Japan would have gone into that as the team who were meant to win that game.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that, it is not a good look for Welsh rugby that we're in that position where that's meant to be the case. You know, we've supported Welsh teams where you go into games against Australia and South Africa and France and England and all of these big superpowers and heavyweights of world rugby, and you go, Wales are the team that are meant to win this game.
Yeah.
You know, there've even been times where we've watched Wales play against the All Blacks and you've gone, Wales should be competitive, there is a chance they could win this game. Whereas that's the terminology we were using against Japan at this point. And that's kind of the indictment of how far Wales have fallen, that you're saying they could win this game, right? Yeah. The other side of that, what you were just saying about the Japanese team, the thing that I think will frustrate people most is that whilst this Japan team had a lot of brilliant players in it, and as you say, you can see what they're working towards, right? Hella inexperienced. Yeah. That you're looking at 6 debuts on Saturday.
That's just on the bench. Yeah. So 6 debuts on the bench.
And 2 starting.
Yeah.
So 8 debuts altogether. And it's not vintage Japan in that sense. You're looking at... So, look, I'd imagine... I'll get into this now, right? a big part of, the biggest part of why Wales lost that game, right? So Wales got into a very commanding lead. Not a very commanding, but a commanding enough
12
lead.
points, yeah.
That you look at that and you go, you should close out a game from here as a Tier 1 international team. You know, granted playing against another Tier 1 international team, but playing against a team with 8 debuts across the board in it, right? So, this Welsh team have some great players in it, okay, as does the Japan one. But because of the fact they've lost 17 on the trot, and we discussed in the preview for this game that there's a lot of players in here who have never won a game playing for Wales, right? And we discussed this at the time off air, but this Welsh team simply doesn't have players in it who know how to close out games at international level, who have that winning instinct. And that includes the likes of, like, Dewi Lake is arguably Wales' best player at this point. You know?
Him and Faletau.
Him and Faletau. You know, that includes Ben Thomas, who's been brilliant for Wales, like across pretty much all of his caps. He's not really had that much of a bad game, you know, but he doesn't know how to win at international level at this point yet. And yet, you kind of can't use that excuse when you're playing against people who've literally never played international rugby before. And so there's two sides to this, and I find it so difficult. Like, how can we not beat a team who've never played internationally before? You know, it's not about the fact we lost to Japan. Well, the fact we lost to Japan is expected because Japan are a great rugby nation. We've had great players playing for them.
And we'll get on. There's plenty more we'll get onto here in a second.
Yeah.
But I think the other side of the this isn't a vintage Japan team debate is that we don't know that yet. Right? Yeah. People keep saying this isn't the Japan team of 2013. We didn't know in 2013 that Japan team were going to go on to beat South Africa 2 years later. We didn't know that the bones of that team would go on and make the quarterfinals of the World Cup 6 years after that. Like, we didn't know any of that at the time.
In a way.
We don't know what this Japan team will go on and do.
Yeah.
Like, Michael Leitch obviously is a big established name. But even like the likes of Dylan Riley has been to a World Cup. He's been around for 3 years.
That was pretty much the case in 2013.
Yeah,
though.
Nakano has been around for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, most of those players here are not that experienced. Like, even the ones that we know, we don't know where any player in this team other than Leitch's ceiling is. And Leitch's ceiling is the greatest Japanese player of all time.
100%. And that 2013 team, nice. That 2013 team, we looked at that and we went, oh, they've got Michael Leitch playing. Yep. And that was the main thing about it. He'd become the captain by that point. And that was the birth of Harumuchi Tadikawa as an international 10. That was the birth of Michael Broadhurst as an international level 7. It was the birth of Hendrik Tui as the 8. It was the birth of Craig Wing playing in the centres for them. Them beating Wales as their first big Tier 1 like flagship
It was the first
win.
time they ever beat a Tier 1 nation.
Exactly. It was the flagship performance that led them to then become the team that they did, right? And that was actually weirdly more crushing, that 2013 one, than this one was, because I expected this team to lose. Whereas
I disagree
at that
with you
point,
on that, but
Wales deliberately didn't pick a lot of their best players to go on that tour in 2013. That they deliberately sent out the second team thinking they would like steamroll Japan, and they disrespected them, frankly, and then ended up losing because of it, you know? And won one test and lost the other because they weakened their own team. And that pissed me off as a Welsh fan at the time in 2013. Whereas this one, it's like, it's more crushing, I think, rather than it pissed me off. It's more like just genuinely sad that we can't really compete with this team. And it's, as you say, we don't know how good they're going to be because there's a lot of players in there that we are quite unfamiliar with. As we mentioned before, like a lot of the props that they brought in, all uncapped, did very well on their first cap.
That was Goromari's breakthrough as well in 2013.
It was.
Right? And he goes on to become like an icon of Japanese rugby almost instantaneously, like inside 2 years.
Yeah, Fukuoka.
We don't know where any of these players, like Masunga, for all we know, in 2 years' time, could be like one of the greats, could be referred to in the same way, or could at least be like a Yamanaka style figure who is like a really brilliant player within this team. We don't know. But that's all an aside, right? This Japan team were great on the day.
Yes.
Michael Leitch said after the game, he was asked, where does this rank amongst your greatest days in the Japanese jersey? And he said, this is number 1.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if I saw the joke made, is it in his old age he's forgotten he beat South Africa?
Yeah.
But he said this is number 1 because all those other games we like prepared for and we worked towards and we had like established teams. This is a group of youngsters we've been rebuilding. We haven't beat a Tier 1 nation since the World Cup in 2019.
It's a good point.
He went like, this means a lot because this shows there's a future. This like we're not building anymore, we're rebuilding, and that is like a bigger and more important task.
Wow.
We've done it a group of youngsters.
I thought you were about to say, he said, it's not a big day. We were expected to win this game. Like, we should be beating teams like Wales. I thought that's what Michael Leitch is a weird one because like he's inspiring in absolutely everything he says, and he's just incredible. And he was incredible in this game.
He was the best player on the pitch.
He was.
I thought, fascinating that the two best players on the pitch were the two oldest.
Yeah.
I thought him and Faletau were both absolute top of the game.
It's so funny when you think about game management and that kind of thing. You think about fly halves or scrum halves, right?
Yeah.
But instead, I thought that game was essentially an arm wrestle of which of the two old boys can last the longest will win the game. And in the end, that was Michael Leitch. So Talupe Faletau, again, we'll get this out the way, was unbelievable.
Yeah.
That he looked genuinely on a different playing field to all of the Welsh players. And he's 34 at this point, so he's been younger at points when playing for Wales.
He's probably only got 6 or 7 years left in him.
Yeah, yeah. But I said this at the time, but if a middle-aged Talupe Faletau is 57 minutes of him being absolutely unbelievable at that level, then I'll take him for another 10 years.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, absolutely.
If it means that each year you lose another minute off, how long he can be incredible for, then that's fine.
I've been saying this about Tom Boat at the Ospreys, right? In a few seasons' time, because he's getting less and less fit every season, he's now 37 or something. They're just going to pick the most important scrum of the game and roll him on for it, and then he'll come back on after that scrum.
Style.
Yeah, and that'll be it.
I love it. But Michael Leitch lasted the full 80, and that was kind of the difference because when Wales hit the point where they started panicking, and we'll come on to this in a bit more depth, I think, Japan very easily could have slipped into the same mode themselves, and both teams would have just gone really loose and just gone at a million, headless chicken style rugby, right? But instead, Michael Leitch brought such a sense of calm in every single thing he did, and it was just sheer example of he didn't, after about 60 odd minutes when they were in the game, he didn't throw any offloads. He was carrying the ball and just presenting it cleanly, you know. He didn't try and make any big hero tackles that could get himself sent off or anything like that.
Yeah.
He was just really cleanly dropping people with the deck. He wasn't going for any heroic steals on the floor. He was instead just going, I'll slow the breakdown a little bit, but I'm not going to push my luck here. Yeah. Everything he did was just so calculated and wise.
Yeah.
And that is, again, wisdom is what he brings to this team. And it just had a positive impact on all 14 of the players around him to the point at which they closed out the game. It was game management. It was just sheer captaincy.
Yeah. You mentioned the 80-minute thing as well, because I think that's interesting. Japan only used 5 of their 8 substitutions, and they didn't replace the tight head prop. Takayuchi played 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And I thought was absolutely brilliant. I thought both Japanese props, Kamamori and Takayuchi, were both fantastic.
Yeah.
Kamamori got really on top of Kieran Azarati, who started the game incredibly well. And I don't know if just the conditions got to his ginger little head, but there was a lot of talk about the conditions, right? And how whoever lasted longer in them would win. And Wales stacked the bench in order to bring on these players. And Japan didn't need to, because their players were conditioned to play in that heat and conditioned to last 80 minutes. And you had, again, a tight head who played 80 minutes and played that well the entire way. Takeuchi, for me, was oh, this is the Japanese type for the next 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
I was oh, this guy is nailing himself in, you know. I thought he was, brilliant. And then you had so many standouts in that pack who played 80 minutes and kept working through it.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that Japan were disrupted a lot by the conditions and by the fact they knocked a lot of ball on in the first half helped them a bit, weirdly. Because it meant that they probably conserved a lot of energy over that first half, were able to strike a bit in the second, as well as the fact they've been conditioned for this.
Yeah. And you mentioned that scrum battle. I mean, I felt for Kieran Azarati because he really scrummaged, and every single scrum penalty was on his side.
Yeah.
You know, that he was the one who was being picked out by the referee constantly. And that Nicky Smith versus Takayuchi battle was really entertaining.
It was.
Because it was very back and forth. However, Azarati really, really struggled to keep his side of the scrum up. And as the game went on, even when Archie Griffin replaced him, once again, Japan on the loose head side were always dominant. And every single time Japan dropped the ball, they had a get out clause there. And so again, that really, really helped with every single time they tried to kind of claw the way back into the game.
I think we could see a lot in the fact that Japan's only points in the first half came in a set piece move.
Yeah.
Right? Which is so well executed, such a nice move. Riley runs a brilliant line to fix Ben Thomas, causes him to step in. Johnny Williams is then left completely on his own. And now he doesn't play much 13 at club level, he mostly plays 12. And he is a defender who I think regularly gets caught thinking at international level. He's someone who plays the best rugby when he doesn't have time to think. And here, he's just very slow to react. And he comes in to help Ben Thomas, then goes, oh shit, no, he's already got him and it's the wrong decision. Opens up a huge amount of space, makes an absolute dog's dinner out of this. And, they get on the outside and Masunga goes over for the try. And it is, a really well-worked set-piece move that is just trying to put pressure on the Welsh 13. They probably designed this not knowing it'd be Johnny Williams playing out of position, but knowing that, right, Wales' options at 13 are Joe Roberts, who obviously is a 13, has played a bunch there, but still in his first, 5 or so caps, Max Page, who would be a debutant, and Johnny Williams, who isn't a 13, and, we can argue over whether he's an international level player, but, has repeatedly come in, having played well for the Scarlets, come into a Welsh jersey, and been a bit sloppy.
He's a wonderfully talented player, Johnny Williams, and he's great to watch at club level. However, he was very, much like a winger that Brian Habana played at one time, he was very slow in the turn here.
He is.
And lining up Ishida against him was a really good move. It was very much clearly, as you say, trying to get Ben Thomas slightly out of the game just to tighten up Johnny Williams a little bit and force the decision on him, put loads of pressure on him. Ishida, a much quicker player than Johnny Williams, and that's often the case with having a 13 who turns inwards. Getting a winger against them on the outside is great. And as you say, Matsunaga's follow-up on the inside is absolutely outstanding, and he finishes the try brilliantly. As you say, it all comes back to Dylan Riley completely eyeing up Ben Thomas and just taking his shoulders out of the game.
Yeah. So I've been saying Matsunga like he's Samoan. Matsunaga. No, sorry. So, however, you bring up a point that I want to get onto, right? Yeah. Which is Welsh players that play great for their club and then weren't up to it on Saturday, right? And this is the problem. Wales felt like an average club team. And this was kind of where they were after that first initial game against Ireland in the Six Nations. The next 2 rounds against Scotland and against England in particular, they felt like a club team, right? And you'd taken Cardiff directly and dropped them into the Six Nations, and the increase in speed, in intensity, in accuracy required by international rugby, they couldn't live with, right? Yeah. And that is essentially what's happened, is Wales brought in Matt Sherritt, who's a very good club coach. However, he is in his first job. He's only had 2 seasons as a head coach. Before that, he was kind of like one of the great club attack coaches who transferred around clubs and did a great job of upping skills and doing analysis and, identifying plays and building plays and so on. But he's not an experienced head coach and has never, a little bit with Wales while taught her away as an attack coach. But really, you get the sense that Wales had been drilled and were playing at the intensity of club rugby. And so Japan, in the first half, when they were inaccurate, they were knocking balls on, I think a lot of that, the ball being greasy and so on, they were not able to get up to intensity. In the second half, once they got a bit of accuracy and a bit of ball, they did, and suddenly they pulled them apart because Wales looked like a club team. And they looked exactly the same, I think, as if you dropped the Scarlets of Cardiff into that team, onto the pitch, rather. There was no ability to shift up the gears and the accuracy and the speed of the game required, as well as the fact their shape and structure looked incredibly easy to these Japanese players because they were club level, right? That's a club level structure, club level systems being run, and there was no real want or need or pace to change that. Yeah,
and you look at everything Wales did well, certainly in terms of the scoreboard. 2/3 of their tries came off first phase because they've got an extremely good first phase coach in Matt Sherritt there. And that is his forte. He would say that himself, that designing moves and picking them out at the right time are what he's really good at as a coach. And drilling it into his players.
Building them around opposition's weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly.
All of that.
And you look at, for example, the Tom Rogers try, that very much comes from they know that the scrum's going to go backwards. So Faletau does that thing that he does, where the ball's at the back and then he goes, all right, see ya.
Yeah.
And the scrum starts creaking 100 miles an hour towards Wales and he goes, all right, in a bit, lads.
Yeah.
And then just fucks off with the ball.
Yeah.
And then they shift it wide. And again, the Welsh handling and the depth and the timing of the running here is brilliant. Yeah. And they managed to get Tom Rogers into that space and score. And you look at, same again with the Ben Thomas try, it's a brilliant first phase move. And they pick it out at the right time, knowing that Japan are slow to peel off here off the back of the maul. Asarati nails his job here and stops Japan from folding round. And Faletau, once again, disguises his run brilliantly, holds the ball at the line until the last second and gives Ben Thomas just enough time to crash over from short distance, right? This is all really, really good. However, it then it gets to the point where the players have to stop being, I hate using this term because it's something that old men watching rugby will use, but when they have to become less robotic in the way that they're trying to play, when they have to think for themselves and have to actually try and organise the game and improvise a little bit. And it's funny, it's ironic that we're saying this about Japan because Japan historically have been based around set-piece moves.
Yeah.
That has always been their thing, is that rugby's a rehearsal to them. It is about how structured can we get ourselves. Even under Jamie Joseph, as recently as the sort of the 2019 and 23 World Cups, you're looking at, that was what Japan were known for. However, they were much better at thinking on their feet in this game, at knowing, and particularly Seung-Chun Lee. And it's a weird one, praising him for his game management, because that's not typically what he's good at. However, he was good at ripping up the playbook, and he was kind of the one player that was given a licence to do that, whilst everyone else stuck to the script.
And Wales's attack was so predictable.
Yeah.
Right? And you say it was less robotic. Marginally, they were running the same shapes and structures. This is why I say it was club level. Like there wasn't a variation really there. They were in the same shapes and structures between the 15s. They get to 115, then they work back the other way, right? And you look at a lot of the best teams in the world, are teams that use the short side smartly to win easy meters. Wales weren't doing that. There was a lot of just like very predictable, very easy to defend attack, working between the 15s until he ran out of players, at which point we saw them generally kicking the ball away. Often because the way this attack is built, right, it is around the first couple of phases. That's the way Sherritt teams typically play, and always have when he was an attack coach. We saw a lot of people complain about Wales kicking the ball away so early, and I'm like, well, once they get beyond 3 phases, like, and I know this has changed in Test rugby, like, more and more teams are playing for longer sets of phases, but Wales' attack loses shape the longer it went on. Yeah. So they were kicking the ball when they get there. Sam Costello went for one, like, speculative drop goal, which he hit quite badly, but other than that, like...
It wasn't far off, to be fair.
I think, like, you know, fine. I liked it as an option.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just saying to myself, like, I think Dan Edwards, if he was on here, would go for a drop goal at this point.
Sure.
And then Costello went for one.
Good on him.
But I think this is one of these other talking points, right? Is Sam Costello. And I thought he was... I really rate Sam Costello as a player. I really like him. And I think the Scots are such a drastically better team when he's playing there. Like, he is the fulcrum of them.
He was the right person to select.
I would have selected
100% he was the right person to select.
I would have selected him too. However,
hindsight is brilliant, but he was the right person to select.
Yep. I would have had Dan Edwards on the bench.
Yeah.
However, I think the problem with Sam Costello, and a lot of people are like, oh, he's shit, he's bad, he's not that. He's not any of those things. But there's a habit of when things aren't going well, disappearing into himself and of not bossing the game. And
He's
what
a confidence
you want,
player, for sure, at international level anyway.
A player like Dan Bigger, who Wales have been used to, and these players have been used to playing with, or those that have been around a while, used to playing with a player like Dan Bigger, like Stephen Jones before them, who, in different ways, but would, if things were going badly, go, no, give me the ball here, lads. Like, I'm going to sort this out, right? And Sam Costello instead goes, oh God, you guys do it. You guys do it. Yeah. And that's kind of his problem.
Or let's Ben Thomas do all of the game management instead, or let's Kieran Hardy do it. You know?
And I think a large part of this has been mismanaged at Scarlett's level. Like, they need an experienced hand to sit alongside him rather than Johan Lloyd, who's their first choice fullback, to come in and play alongside him, and then Joe Hawkins coming in next season, which I think is a mistake. Bringing Joe Hawkins isn't a mistake, but bringing him as a fly half is a mistake.
Yeah, sure. Or at least we could see it as that for the time being.
Sure.
Until we see it pay off.
But like, no, I think they need to sign a Stephen Myler type experienced fly half who sit there and like help him out a bit.
It's funny because, like, obviously everybody knows that Wales' best player overall is Jack Morgan, right?
Yeah.
However, the player that they missed the most in this game was Thomas Williams. You know, that you look at somebody you were saying who can manage the game, whose kicking game is better than any of the other 9s or 10s that they have available to them. But more importantly, as you say, how can they stretch Japan? It is, as you say, you use blind sides. You know, you look at the back row that Japan had out. You look at Leitch, he flies off the line. You look at Fakatava, he was outstanding. He flew off the line all day long. You look at even like Warner Dearns playing in the second row, I thought was phenomenal. Yeah. Especially in the second half of that game, he really, really grew into it and just became a pain in the backside for every single Welsh player at both sides of the ball and was always getting over and spoiling Wales's ball and slowing it down all the time. And that made it so hard for Wales's attack to look less predictable, you know, because Japan were on their feet going, brilliant, come at us. What are you going to do? And there was nobody there to kind of mix that up and change things up and do something that would potentially, that could backfire, but with Thomas Williams, when he does that, 9 times out of 10, they actually just weirdly come off. Yeah.
We mentioned last week in our preview that Eddie Jones' selections for Japan so far have been quite unpopular in Japan because he's not been picking the form players and the best players, as they saw it, in Japan Rugby League 1. Yeah. He has generally been picking players who he thinks will fit his game plan, right? Matt Sherritt this week did the complete opposite. He went and he said repeatedly when he was asked about his team selection, he said, I want to reward guys who are playing well for their club. And all the time, we see fans on the internet and in pubs and in grounds and so on, all saying all the time, why aren't they picking on form? Why isn't Gatlin or Borthwick or whoever, Farrell, picking on form and picking my guy who is playing better than the guy starting, who is an established international with 50 caps, right? And we saw on Saturday, it's a perfect bit of tape of why that doesn't work, right? Why sometimes you just need established international players, right? So on form, currently, Josh McLeod is, other than Jack Morgan, the best 7 in Wales. Like, he is the form 7 in Wales. However, we saw on Saturday, and I thought Raffle came on and did nothing, but like he's not an impact player, so it's a really weird choice to put on the bench.
I agree.
But we saw on Saturday, like there was a massive downgrade to when Tommy Raphael has started for Wales, because Raphael is a senior, like established international player, and I know you can make the argument of like, oh, how do you expect these guys to get established? Like, you've got to identify these players early, I think, and some players like just are
sometimes
test
you do
players.
that via the bench.
Yeah.
Via giving them half an hour at a time, then it's 50 minutes, then it's 60, then it's 80 or whatever.
And I thought like McLeod made one great turnover, but otherwise was broadly anonymous. You look at the same thing across the board, like Kieran Hardy, I think, has been on brilliant form and is a proven test player and passed, but did not play like himself, did not play like he's been this season. Had a pretty solid first half, but like second half,
he faded out the game as soon as Wales started to fall apart. He wasn't that senior figure to drift everybody, to bring everybody up, you know, as much as he started the game pretty well, and then suddenly, when Sam Costello started to fade, so did he a little bit.
Yeah, and I think Johnny Williams likewise, like I thought was poor, but like has been on good form for the Scarlets, so I get the selection, but like you've got to look at these things. And then Ben Thomas, who like, it's a weird sticking point, right? Because he is the form back in Wales maybe this season. There's an argument for that.
Yeah.
Certainly. And he has been pretty good for Wales, but I don't know if it's just me, but I can't see Wales winning World Cup with him at 12.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, if you dropped him into like a 2019 or 2011 team,
the thing
and
is,
there's this like, there's something about him that screams brilliant like club player to me rather than test player.
I get it. I just think so much is being asked of him.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem.
He's a really great form player who's been playing pretty well in a very heavily like hamstrung losing Wales team. And so they've gone, brilliant, do you want to do everything for the backs?
Yeah, and this
like,
is
do you want to run the entire back line? Do you want to be the defensive captain? Oh yeah, do you want to like play it, be the 10 cover as well? So you're in charge of essentially when we're getting the ball wide. Brilliant, do you want to be in charge of our kick strategy as well? And it's like, he can't do all of that. He can be a system player. You know, if you look at what Wales have lost recently, right? Because like Wales were in that game, okay, and Faletau was essentially worth like 90% of that, and like Dewi Lake, mate, it's not your fault either. You know, you're doing your best, mate. Like, you're a brilliant.
I thought
player.
Alex Mann had a great game as well.
Alex Mann, really, really good, right? But if you could bring back, let's say 2, potentially 3 of Ken Owens, Jonathan Davis, Lee Halfpenny, Dan Bigger, Alan Wynne-Jones, Gareth Davis, Thomas Williams, Jack Morgan, you know, who were on the Lions tour, whatever. You know, I guess Adam Beard, Dav Jenkins are injured as well. If you could bring back, particularly of those players who've recently retired, right? Thomas Francis, George North, right? To an extent, Liam Williams, okay? If you could bring in 2 or 3 of those as leadership figures to help close out this game, that would have been great. I daren't say Wales would have won the game.
Who would you have taken, out of curiosity, if you're taking 2 players in?
I'd have 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, take it. Let's say instead of like absolute peak form, but like let's say the median form of their career, right?
Sure.
I would have taken Jonathan Davis. That would be the absolute number 1 name that I'd have taken there, because that is somebody who can help out Ben Thomas. And as I say, like, you can take off half of those responsibilities from Ben Thomas that I've just listed by putting Jonathan Davis in there. You can have not only a defensive leader but a captain in there who's experienced at international level, who can close out the game, who can do, you know, kicking for the sidelines as well and getting like moving the lines.
Dan Bigger's the obvious shout.
Oh yeah, Dan Bigger as well.
Come in,
Good point.
kick the goal, shut the game down.
Yeah.
He would have taken drop goals. He would have shut that game down massively.
And there is, say what you like about Dan Bigger and how limited he is, could have been as a player or whatever, right? But fading out a game is something I've never seen him do his entire life. Even when he was like playing badly as like a 19-year-old, right? Fading out of a game is something you could never accuse him of.
The other name I'd throw out there though is Adam Beard, because Wales' lineup was really shoddy.
It was terrible.
And it doesn't help that Ben Carter got himself knocked out 30 seconds in.
I hope Ben Carter's okay.
I hope he is. He was up and about like by half time.
Yeah,
was
it
talking
looked
and walking about.
horrible.
Yeah, horrible, and really hope he's okay. But
I really felt for him because he really deserved the selection as well.
He was the line-out caller, right? So losing your line-out caller 30 seconds in isn't going to help things. Bringing in James Ratty, who's a superb player, but like it's a hybrid 6 lock.
Who's played about 15 minutes of international rugby before that as well.
Yeah. And then you look at that back row, right? And Alex Mann's pretty short. Josh McLeod isn't much of a line-out jumper. You're relying on Faletau very heavily then.
Yeah.
Because him and Ratty are both like good line-out jumpers, but you only have one out-and-out option, and that does deplete you a bit. So like you losing one of those really did disrupt Wales. You saw that impact. The line-out become a real problem. There was a really good piece that Sam Lano, friend of the channel, other than when he's playing touch rugby against me breaking my finger,
Hello,
put
Sam.
on Sam, put on Substack, on his Substack, which is worth going and having a look at, about how the problem with Wales is they can't identify the quality of chances, and like they can create chances, but it's knowing like sometimes there's one example he pulled out where and they thought at the time, right, where they ran a first phase move to get over the gain line. They got really far over the gain line, and Japan was scrambling to rearrange. And clearly the set move was then they kick it and they try and create chaos on the second phase with Rogers following up. And what they should have realised is actually it's on to play here, right? But Costello didn't call the move off and they went through with it and they kicked it. But the opposite is also true. Sometimes they beat in the 22 and they keep playing when actually nothing was on.
Yeah.
And you had this combination of them getting into the 22 and playing a bad ball and not thinking like, okay, let's try a speculative kick or let's try a drop goal. Let's try and keep the scoreboard ticking over and just going on that. But also when they got into 22, they had 2 chances in the last 15, 20 minutes of the game and they lost both those lineouts.
Yeah.
Like they overthrew one, they had one stolen. And those are the kind of things that come to haunt you much more than like you think about the try and you think about all the other moments. But like, and people keep kicking the ball away. But like when they got territory, and a lot of that came from them kicking well in those last stages, they couldn't do anything with it.
Doing
They lost
something
the
with
line
it.
out.
Yeah. And you look on the flip side of that, Japan, when they go to the corner, the winning try they score here, it is so efficient. Getting the ball to the back of the line out, Wales aren't really doing much to kind of try and turn this over. Once again, you mentioned Dav Jenkins or Adam Beard as the guys that Wales have who are very good at, even if not disrupting this maul, just like slowing it down a little bit, like making the transfer a little bit trickier, They peel off at the right moment. And Vailea here comes off his wing and finishes this try brilliantly, brushing off Aaron Wainwright, of all people, who's one of the stronger Wales players, especially in this scenario. How many times have you seen him stop tries from this situation, Ducks down, goes nice and low, finishes the try brilliantly. Incredible upper body strength. So much credit to him and Japan here. Because as you say, like that is pure, like clinical and really, really composed in a pressurised scenario.
I love it as an Eddie Jones move.
Yeah.
That bringing the winger in of like, teams do this all the time now, bringing their backs and using them as kind of nails in the maul, of adding extra weight in. It was Toby Booth brought up the stat that their chance of score when he was at the Ospreys, their chance of scoring a try went up by 50% if they brought the backs into the maul. And they had like a running tally on their in their team room of how many tries they scored without Kieran Williams in the maul and how many tries with Kieran Williams in the maul. And it was like when Kieran Williams went in, they almost always scored because he is the greatest rugby player of all time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like having a winger instead come in as the hooker and break off, and like someone that has a natural nose for the try line and has the power to ride a tackle as well. Brilliant. I love it. Really inspired. Really simple, but like really, really smart bit of play.
Yeah, and it takes a little bit of pressure off Horodos, the hooker, to actually try and finish, because like he's got enough to worry about with the throw and the transfer and just driving forward. So get somebody who is a specialist try scorer in Vailea to come in there and finish it.
I think we might see more and more of this taking off.
Yeah,
we might see big wingers and big centres used all the time in that role.
Definitely.
I think it's a really interesting thing we saw at the start of something there.
Yeah, especially with inexperienced hookers.
Yeah.
You have certain, like you look at like a Dan Sheehan or even a Ronan Kelleher, for example.
Yeah.
They're really good at scoring tries because they've done this so many times that they are good finishers. So you don't need, let's say Leinster to bring on Tommy O'Brien off his wing to finish that. You can have him add impact somewhere else in the attack. But when you have, like the Japanese current crop of hookers aren't known for that, for their kind of elusive, dynamic try-scoring work. Whereas, like if they still had shot a Horrier, then maybe they'd have just trusted into it. But sadly, he's now retired because of woke.
That is true. That is exactly why. I think the other pleasing thing about this Japan late-stage performance is I loved the way they played the last few stages, which was they just kicked absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And they forced Wales to kick it back because they were just sending these loose kicks down wherever there was grass. And it was strategic in the fact they didn't seem to have an overall strategy. They were just kind of hammering them in behind to wherever they saw a chance for the ball to roll and bounce, and then they could put pressure on. Welsh player would kick it back, and they'd waste further time.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really smart bit of play. I thought I really liked it as an approach. And there was a little bit like harried and panicked, but you made Wales even more harried and even more panicked, and they either ran it back and got isolated, or they kicked it back and gave Japan another chance to try and pressure them. just really, really smart kind of game management late on.
It was turning off a little bit of the Chisoku towards the end, wasn't it? It was just like slightly put the handbrake on and go from there. And I think literally like the last sort of 2 minutes of play, they managed so well in terms of just winding Wales down, winding the clock down, and then getting the ball back and kicking it out at the end. They did such a good job of that. And a lot of teams, as you know, lose their discipline in those scenarios. But once again, the sense of calm that Leitch just brought to everybody was what won them the game in the end.
Yeah. No, I thought they were superb. I thought, obviously didn't start well, but to overcome what they did and wrap back round with a young team.
They were patient in everything they did.
And I think it bodes really well for Japan going forward long term, even if they lose this weekend. I think it was a really, really important game for them.
Yeah.
As Michael Leitch talked about, there was another thing he said in that interview that he mentioned there was a scrum where, as it was being reset, he looked up and saw one of the Welsh players, and I think it was Costello from the way he described him, the way he talked about it, like looking at those moments, who looked so knackered and so kind of like looked so tired in the heat and was mopping his brow. And Leitch thought to himself, then we're going to win this game.
Yeah.
And it was just seeing the conditions of seeing like one player being like...
Wales did not respond that well to the heat towards the end. No. Like it clearly tired them out. And they went 6-2 as mentioned before. And that was the correct thing to do, I think. As you say, like it would have been nice to have Dan Edwards, but when you think about it, like having 6 forwards on the bench so you can roll on a new pack when it's that hot and everybody's... Like, but also the humidity being
I felt this around high. 50 minutes is like, actually... I completely get it and probably would have done the same thing or been certainly very tempted to do the same thing if I was in Matt Sherritt's shoes and playing 6-2. But actually I think Dan Edwards would be more valuable in this game right now.
I get that.
Of a 10 who come on and boss it a bit.
I get that. It's a difficult one because there's not really anybody in that Welsh backline that you look at and you go, look, they can play every position.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a very difficult one ahead of this weekend because presumably the conditions will be similar, even if not quite as hot, but it will still be similar. It will still be more than Wales are used to, expecting. You know,
anything other than mild rain.
Yeah, exactly. And so, once again, I think Japan will go into this extremely confident that they can beat them once again.
Yeah, but I also think Tom Rogers said this is going to be the most fired up I've ever been for a game. And you've had a few Welsh players being a bit like, no, like this is it though.
Yeah.
And I don't think Wales will switch off if they have a similar start next week because I think that will scar them in a way. And I hope they'll be able to use it as a motivating factor and not leave them with 19 in a row.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a real danger with that. And I think you've kind of got to refresh the team a bit. You know, we keep mentioning Dan Edwards' name for a guy who didn't play, but like I think you've got to bring him in. You've got to have a look at him as like someone who will not be bothered by the pressure.
I don't think they can afford not to at this point.
We'll see. Do you have anything else to add on this game?
Where do you think it ranks in the 18 greatest Welsh losses of the last 18 games?
Honestly, if we're going... Are we going... No. I think it's definitely bottom 5 most painful for me. What about you?
Yeah, I would say...
Bottom 5 most painful in the losing streak.
Thing is, I'm so numb at this point. Like,
yeah, but this was it. Like
I'd probably put it in the middle of the pack.
There was a genuine horror to it of like... Feeling like, okay, fine, we're getting this off our back. And I didn't feel elated about winning it.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I felt a little bit like I was hoping Japan would put more of a fight and we could overcome something. And then I very much got my wish. And yeah, and here we are now. 19 games, 18 games in a row.
Pending.
19 games potentially. If they lose that, they then play Argentina. So that'd be 20.
Yeah.
Then 21 would be against Japan. Again, if they lose that again, then it's South Africa, New Zealand, so they should turn the losing run around then.
All I'm saying is, right, if we want to avoid Sri Lanka's record, which we might not necessarily want to, next year, WRU, Test Series, Queensland Reds, cap it.
We can't because the World League's starting. World Rugby will give us our fixtures. And you know what they'll probably give us? It'll just be like Springboks. Then it'll be like afterwards we'll play like Sri Lanka themselves, who will be going to like, no, you're not equaling our record. We're so proud of that. It's all we've got going for us here. Please don't do it.
Well done, Hong Kong on World Cup qualification.